What's up, everyone? I'm Scott.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to Liquid Carnage. Buddy, since the last time we spoke, a lot has happened. The Kingman made national news for a flood.
Yeah.
Down the street from my house, the street that flooded was literally 2 blocks from my house. Your reigning defending world champion football team got smoked like a Philly blunt on national television.
Wow.
You saw a great play.
Saw a great play.
And I directed a golf tournament this weekend where a hole-in-one was hit and somebody won a car.
Wow. Boy, how exciting is that?
Well, let's get past the insurance paperwork first, and then we'll talk about how exciting it is.
Man, a lot has happened.
It's been a very, very busy week.
Holy, you did forget that the Cardinals got played like a Philly cheesesteak sandwich themselves.
That makes no sense. They got burnt like burnt ends on a Kansas City barbecue.
They got smoked like a blunt. They got filleted like Jeffrey Dahmer, dude. I mean,
let's not get too crazy. I mean, it was a bad game, but
it was horrible. It was horrible.
It's between the Rams and the Cardinals. You see what happens when you don't play your starters in the preseason.
Yeah, I think we're learning that. I forgot. I had the worst fantasy beginning game of my life, and I still won. So what does that tell you, man?
Well, I won both my matchups, and I set records in both. So high score in both leagues this weekend. So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I set the second lowest score in our league, and I still won. So what does that tell you?
Who'd you play? The EP?
I played the intern. He got 4 points out of Aaron or Rodgers.
Oh man. That's the joy and the pain of fantasy football.
Oh gosh, yeah. He got 4 points out of Aaron Rodgers, and a team where they scored 38 points, his receiver got any of those points. Philadelphia scored 38 points, and he had the receiver that didn't get a catch.
And that's the joy of fantasy football is I spent the first half of the early games on Sunday just like, well, shit, I picked a terrible team. This is crap. And by the fourth quarter of those games, like, well, this isn't so bad after all.
Yeah.
And and then you just cruise, so it's fine.
Yeah, I was 3-0 in my leagues too, so I feel pretty good.
So it's good balance. It's obviously a $1 billion industry, so it's not going anywhere. It is the modern entertainment of today's world.
Yes, and I mean, 400 years ago they didn't have fantasy football, so they had to find the entertainment elsewhere.
Yeah, well, they also didn't have football.
They didn't have anything.
Yeah. I'm sure they had something. They had European football. They had some form of soccer. Did they steal that from the Aztecs yet?
Yeah, I don't know. They had cricket, maybe. I don't know.
That's something worth looking into. But it's funny. As we talked about this in our show notes, I started going through and thinking about storytelling, and the way stories were told 400 years ago, versus and how they've evolved over time. And our modern day poets are musicians of today, more or less, or TikTok influencers for all I fucking know. But I'd like to think that's mostly musicians in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel the same way that the storytelling of today has changed drastically, and maybe it's because you have to control someone's attention for such a short period of time that the words have to be like right there, magical, and get them out there because people can't focus for longer than that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you start talking about that. I had a professor in college that was a professional storyteller, and I didn't realize, this is 20 years ago now, that they actually have like conventions and festivals where people gather to tell stories that are passed down from generation to generation, or retell famous stories like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. And these people learn everything word for word and do the voices and so forth, and it's really amazing. So if you ever get the opportunity to go to one of those, or just a night of a storyteller, it's totally worth it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I've never heard of that before, but that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought so. But last week you mentioned you're going to a play, or maybe not on the show, but you mentioned you're going to a play.
Oh yeah, so we've been trying to do a date night. Nothing serious, but we're just kind of like trying to break the monotony of just you come home after a long day at work, you cook dinner, you watch TV, you go to bed. So we started planning a little date night where one of us or will kind of plan the event where we're going to go to dinner and what we're going to do that evening, and then the next person does the next one, and we're just, I don't know, every couple weeks, whatever, just to kind of change things up. We went to the Phoenix Theater company in Phoenix and saw a play called The Book of Will. And the premise of the Book of Will is it's kind of a true story of immediately after Will Shakespeare's death, a group of the actors that played in the theater that he belonged to decided to collect his works and put them into a published book, or a published, they call it a folio, Folio.
Mhm.
And it's a story basically of how these actors kind of tried to, bring all these plays together to publish them for basically the group of the world. I mean, it's
Yeah.
basically writing a book. But what I found fascinating about it was back in those times, Shakespeare didn't really compile a group of scripts and say, okay, here's a base group of scripts. What he would do is he would write the parts for each of the actors as a separate, okay, you're Othello, so you get this one, and you're Ophelia, and you get this one. And so no one none of these actors, as they started this project, had any accumulation of all of the pages of any of his plays. Well, what got me thinking is that it is very possible that if these actors had not tried to gather these plays together, they might have been lost.
Yeah.
They might have been lost, and the whole of history may not have remembered or had any way to cherish the works of William Shakespeare. I guess what was happening at that time after Shakespeare's death, because the theater still wanted to do the plays, but they didn't have the total notes of any of the plays that Shakespeare wrote.
Mhm.
What was happening is that it'd be kind of close to, well, it was something like this. So you know, let's just paraphrase the play, like Romeo and Juliet. Well, we know what it's basically about, so we'll just kind of paraphrase what the story is. And so they would produce these plays, saying they were William Shakespeare's plays, but they would reproduce these plays without having the complete script. And so all
So
I
they
could
just
think
put it
about
together
is
based on their past performances and hoping that they got something close to the original content.
exactly. And how the play starts is there is one of these. They do a performance of a play based on the close enough version of it, and the actors who were part of Shakespeare's friends group were watching this play and saying, oh my gosh, this is just like a brutality of this man's work. I can't believe they're letting this happen. And they realized, well, yeah, but there's no way to recreate what the real play was because we don't have copies of the real play. So that was kind of the impetus. But it got me thinking, if these people hadn't done this, would
Mhm.
we have known William Shakespeare? Would
I,
we have had any of his plays performed over the centuries as part of the classics of American literature or English literature?
we would have had some form.
We
Maybe
would have
not.
had a plagiarized form, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, unless someone found the actual original plays the way he wrote them,
Right.
to know how they were intended. I think that's back, especially back then when you had to copy everything by hand. There was no print press yet. That that adds up. That takes a lot of time and effort. So things are going to get lost in translation when you're writing everything by hand or translating everything by hand. You're essentially playing the telephone game without having an actual telephone invented.
Yeah, and the story went on to basically say that there was a bunch of his original plays that they could not find. They could not find them right away, and so the first edition of this folio of his plays were missing some of the big ones, like Taming of the Shrew, Twelfth Night, like a bunch of his plays that they couldn't even find. And it took years for them to find a lot of his work because of the way that they were just spread out over. I mean, they were literally going to each actor's house, whoever played at the theater, to ask them if they had any of the pages from the play that was written.
Do you realize how many of his plays are still played out in today's modern cinema? Even though they might not be the Taming of the Shrew exactly, or Macbeth, or Romeo and Juliet, but the same basic plot line and premise um,
Oh,
is a through and throughout all of our movies today. It's a constant theme.
yeah, and I think that the reason why, even if it's not exactly Taming of the Shrew or Romeo and Juliet, the themes are still played out because the reality is that the emotions that come from the plays are universal. You know, those emotions from 400 years ago are still emotions that we deal with today. So you can write a story that is not Romeo and Juliet, but people still want to see it because those emotions about, love and not being able to love the person you want because of family or religion or whatever, they still play out.
Well, I think Shakespeare's the one that realized and figured out there's really only 7 basic stories you can tell. At the end of the day, there's 7 different themes that every story is based around. And
Okay.
boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. Underdog has to overcome the king or the villain. There's only so many central themes that movies can be, and when you start trying to defute that theory, you start looking at every major movie or every major story, and every major story has either one or a combination of those themes.
And I hypothesized as I was driving home that night, if these men and women had not done that, what the impact today would have been. You know,
Oh,
we wouldn't have Hamlet. We wouldn't have the writing. Would we have survived as a species? Of course. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's not like we would have died off if we didn't have them, but to have lost those those words and those forms of humanity that kind of represent who we are as a species would have been lost forever.
So
And the words that they do matter. Words do matter because they make us more or less depending on if we have them or not.
absolutely, and to shift gears from this, as we talk about one of the greatest English playwrights of all time, if not the greatest English playwright of all time. If you look at this from a modern perspective,
Okay. Okay.
and we mentioned earlier in the show that today's storytellers, whether you're writing screenplays, movies, or music, poems, however you want to call it, I look at music a lot. I listen to music a lot, I should say. And I learned very early on in literature in junior high that a lot of songs are either poems or they just tell stories, and we had to go through and find different songs that told stories, and that always kind of stuck in the back of my head. So whenever I listen to music, I always just kind of, after you hear a song a few times, you start listening to see if they're telling a story or whatnot. And I believe that if someone tells you who they are, you need to believe it. And Nickelback recently put out a new single. Everyone shits on Nickelback, and I don't know why. I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here and say it's because they're jealous. They can say their music sucks, but these guys sell millions upon millions of records. They sell out arenas, and they sing about sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Okay.
And when you listen to their early work up to their modern stuff, and especially this new song they just released, most of their songs tell a story. There's a reason why there's the start, the middle, and the resolution by the end. And to me, it's modern day storytelling. And you can argue that Chad Kroger, the lead singer, he tells stories in every song, and I'm sure most other artists do, but he's very point blank and very rudimentary with it. And I think that's what people tend to hate. It's because they don't have to think about it; they just need to enjoy it.
Okay. Okay. Do you
Um,
find that the story, even though it's only 3 to 4 minutes, is still as powerful as if it would be like reading a book?
well, powerful is a loose term
Oh,
in,
okay.
in this scenario, you know, because again, if you listen, if somebody tells you who they are, you need to believe it. This is a group that is very upfront. I saw them in concert, God, 10 years ago, in Vegas, and they came out on stage and said, "We're here to party. We're here to have a good time. Who wants to take Jaeger shots with us? Let's do this." And
Wow.
they
Okay.
sang songs about sex and drugs and rock and roll and having a good time. And if you look at most of their big hits, It's about sex and drugs and rock and roll, or having a good time, or remembering the good times. And people might not like it, but I mean, it's a pretty solid form of storytelling. And there's a lot of other modern day artists out there that do something very similar. Corey Taylor's another one that comes to mind. He's the lead singer for a band called Slipknot and Stone Sour, and he does his own solo work. So he's got 3 different variations of how he tells stories and writes stories. But he's a little more complex, and I think that's just where the modern day poets are. And I would consider these guys modern day poets, whether they would call themselves that or not. You know.
So yeah, because I mean, I think that I have found in my experiences that when it's hard to dismiss someone's story when you feel that they put themselves out there,
Yeah.
good, bad, or indifferent. It's hard to dismiss a story and say, you know what, that's stupid, or that's when someone's vulnerable. It, it relates to people. People can relate. They may joke about it, they may laugh at it, or they might diss it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that
It
there is a
happens.
common theme about from everyone that we relate to that vulnerability. Maybe because we feel empathy for the person, but more likely because we sympathize with the person. We've experienced that kind of pain ourselves.
Well, and I agree, and I think that's probably in this case, like a lot of people don't like the band. I mean, there's a lot of memes out there, and it's ironic that they released a new song this past week because last month there's a meme going around the internet saying, what the world needs right now, everything's so screwed up. What's the worst that could happen? Nickelback releases new music, and it's. But a few years ago, when Imagine Dragons released their last album, they had memes of Nickelback handing off the baton to Imagine Dragons for the worst band in the world. And
Wow.
right, and it's not. I don't think these bands are terrible. The EP and I will argue about what's good music and what's not good music, modern wise, and what he listens to is nothing I would ever consider good music, and I'm sure vice versa. But that's the beauty of taste. That's the beauty of poetry. I'm sure there's thousands upon thousands of people that don't like William Shakespeare's works.
Oh, believe me, if you've ever read William Shakespeare in the raw, it's very difficult to read. It's because it's written in even though it's English, it's written in a in a vernacular that is very difficult to understand
Oh
in
yeah.
today's understanding of English. I
Well,
mean, it doesn't, kind of like the Bible is too. I mean, it's written in the hithers and thithers and these thous, and we're
well,
not used to hearing the story like that.
that's the original context. When you bring it to modern day context, what's the one thing you hated reading in high school? Most people hated reading in high school. Shakespeare. I remember sitting in freshman English having to read Romeo and Juliet
Yeah,
and parts of Macbeth
yeah,
and having to dissect it. And
yeah,
it's the most boring, dry material if you don't know what's going on or you don't understand it.
yeah, yeah.
But some
Uh,
people are enthralled by it. And that's the beauty of storytelling. Everyone's got a different voice and a different vision, and it appeals to different people. I don't think you're ever going to find somebody that appeals in one voice to everyone.
Yeah, I think that no matter how the message is delivered, the emotions that are emitted from how whatever's written is what people relate to.
Yes.
The words of a Nickelback song don't mean nearly as much as the emotional connection that you as the listener or me as the listener take from those words. I think that that's probably the beauty of the written, poetry and that thing as well is everyone's reading of those words, it means something different. I noticed when I was doing a lot more reading of books, I would read a book and I would highlight maybe a statement or something that impacted me. I would highlight it as, wow, I want to come back and read that again. That's something that means something to me. If you read the same book, you may not find that that relates anything to you.
Oh yeah. Well, it's how entertainment's supposed to be. Everybody interprets it differently. And that's why there's book clubs. That's why there's music clubs. So people can get together and exchange those ideas. So maybe the ideas you have aren't anything I've ever considered. So it's worth considering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that whenever the Academy Awards come out, I'm always more fascinated with who wins like the best original screenplay stories.
Yeah.
or the award versus some of the acting and actors awards. Because I found that there have been many times where someone won the award for best actor or best actress, where it's like, I
Yeah.
don't get it. I don't get why they won. For me, it's like if I see a story, like if I see a movie that has winning of the best original screenplay, I usually am more fast interested in watching that movie than watching the best actor
Yeah.
nomination or award winner movie.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. It's for me, it's like when I listen to music, I like to listen to the evolution of artists in their albums.
Yeah.
It's funny, and a lot of bands are like this. When you listen to their first or second CD, like their album, like the CD, it's dating me, but you listen to their early work. We'll say their first album or two. It's when everything's usually pretty heavy and pretty dark because a lot of these people write at a young age. When you're going through those younger days, the emotions are all foggy and you don't know how to handle things. So it's a little bit darker, a little bit heavier. And there's a lot of bands that have music like that. And then as they get bigger, they don't have to write about those emotions anymore because what's the old saying? You have an entire life to write your first album and 6 months to write the second.
Oh yeah. Okay, that makes sense, right?
So, yeah, the minute you find fame, you're not singing about deep things anymore. You're singing about what's going to sell because now you've got money and the record companies want to keep getting you out there. So your songs become lighter. They become, poppier, more reflective. And the same goes for movies. The same goes for plays. You don't get to normally stay true to your roots until you get to a certain point where money doesn't matter anymore and you can go back to your roots. And that happens on a lot of different planes.
I feel the same way when it comes to series that I like. Like the
Hmm.
first year or 2 years of a series, it's more, kind of getting you to know the characters, getting you to know the storyline. But I noticed a significant improvement in like season 2.5 to 3 and beyond,
When I go
where
and find their stride.
you start to say, okay, I they understand their character now. The writing understands the character and which way now they have a better idea of where the character's going, and some of the writing is so powerful because now you've got the actor and the writing in tune with themselves and moving forward to do so. I mean, it always gets better over time because now you know yourself, kind of like what you're talking about with the music. These songwriters now know they don't have to prove anything to anybody. They can just write based on their success and based on who they are. They can just write and go. And there's some pretty good stuff that comes out of it.
Let me ask you this then with that. All the reboots, like the TV show reboots where they bring back old shows 25, 30 years later, same characters, everything else. Do you watch any of those at all or
I I don't.
okay,
I,
so
I don't, but only like I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation. I never watched any of the ones after that. Like they have, I mean, they've probably done what, 7 of them now after Star Trek: Next Generation. I've never really watched any of those. And it's nothing personal. Like, oh, no one's going to disrespect. When it's good, no one's going to disrespect it. But I didn't.
I'll
I'm
give you
trying to go
I'll give
ahead.
you a great example.
Okay.
Cobra Kai on Netflix.
Okay. Yeah.
The Karate Kid reboot 30 years later.
Hmm.
Um, one, I don't think anything's supposed to be that addictively good when it's so cheesy. You know, you remember the Karate Kids growing up, Daniel San, Mr. Miyagi, Johnny Lawrence, Sensei
Yeah.
Kreese, to bring all those people back 35, 40 years later and like pick up their stories, after decades and create new stories and bring everybody back little by little and even like one offers to do that is it's pretty remarkable, and to tell a solid story that everyone really seems to enjoy and get behind goes a long way. And you're seeing more and more series like that where people are reimagining original shows that were great, or rebooting or telling other aspects of the story. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are two very good examples of that. So
Yeah, and see, I guess that was, I guess that would be one thing that I would differentiate is Reboot to me would be like redoing the original Karate Kid
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
Will
making
Smith.
that story with different actors. Yeah, there we go, perfect example. When they redid the Karate Kid with not Will Smith, but
Jackie
his
Chan.
son,
Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan.
Jaden Smith. Thank you. I was not impressed because the story by itself was good enough. You didn't have to reboot it to update it to a good enough time. You know what I mean? Like the story was good enough on its own. You could have taken the Karate Kid 30 years ago and put it in front of kids nowadays. They would have enjoyed the story just as much because it was just a well-written story. So to me, the Cobra Kai is exactly what we're talking about. We're in tune and connected with the story, not because it's rebooting the old story, but it's a continuation of the trials and tribulations of characters that we fell in love with a long time ago, but also who have had trips and falls and things didn't work out the way they want to. We can relate to that. If they would have taken that story of the Karate Kid from 35 years ago and tried to make it again, it wouldn't work as well.
It wouldn't hit on today's world. But any to our 4 listeners out there, I'm sure they all watched the Cobra Kai. So I think you and Noreen would really enjoy it. I know.
We just didn't. I mean, we didn't realize that it came out. I didn't know the 5th season had come out. So we're gonna definitely watch it now that we know it's back.
I'm not gonna lie. I did watch that in a day.
Yeah, we had friends that did the same thing. I mean, literally, they did the same thing.
You don't realize, like, oh, what's another 30 minutes, and then 5 hours later you finish the whole season. But it's one of those, and that's the beauty of storytelling. As we get close to the end of today's show, when you can tell a good story, when you can write a great song or poem, and it lasts over generations, and people's like, yeah, you know what, that song still holds up, that place still holds up, 3 generations later. That says a lot.
Yeah, well, and I think that I mean, the story of it's so funny because you had to read Romeo and Juliet when you were a kid. I had to read Romeo and Juliet when I was a kid. I think that my friend's daughter, who is a junior this year, one of her stories is a Will Shakespeare play. I don't know which one it is, but she has to read a Will Shakespeare play.
Yeah,
that's 40 years. I mean, we're talking 40 years difference, but that resonates because the storytelling it transcends
the principle,
the time frame.
Yeah,
it transcends it.
Yeah.
So I'm with you, and frankly, I think one of the things that we have tried to hold pure on this show is we try to tell a story of 2 friends how they would talk if they were at a bar, right? I mean, and the stories sometimes you say, oh, like sometimes Tom the EP gets up pissed because that's the dumbest story I've ever heard. But it still relates to a story that someone might be having with their friend somewhere else. And I think that's why, every week, even after 5.5 years now, we still have people that say, yeah, I'm going to listen to this just because, hey.
Well, the moral of the story is that you and I have had weirder conversations in bars. So, if any of these conversations help everybody or help somebody, that's a good start.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, exactly. So there you go.
So, if as we wrap up today's show, I mentioned this earlier, if you have a story that's been significant to you throughout the generations, or a song or a poem that you want to share, or tell us how it changed your life, hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, all at Liquid Carnage. If you have any Nickelback songs you want to recommend, or EP, Tom, because at this point he hates them. At least that's what he tells people, but let's be real. I bet he has the whole catalog on his Apple.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I'm sure he does.
If you want to find out about that, hit him up Liquid_EP on Twitter and the Instagram. He'll appreciate that one.
That's funny. Yeah, we've had 2 bad weeks where we've had the EP get pissed at us for bad recordings and stuff. Let's try not to make a 3rd one.
Yeah, let's try to fix that one.
So exactly.
That being said, take us home, Jason.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We always appreciate you guys. That was Scott. I am Jason. And as always, if you never know quite what to say, just have yourself some Liquid Carnage.